Welcome to Hyperfixation Investigations, the podcast where two neurospicy best friends take time each Saturday to infodump their research deep dive of the week.
Lovingly produced and copyrighted by Stag Productions.
Today's fun fact is, mushrooms are largely responsible for the rain in rainforests. Fungi release masses of spores into the air, and as they float above the forest, they attract moisture. Essentially, they act as the little centers for the formation of raindrops in the clouds.
Good morning, I'm Josh, and I will be captaining this week's episode, Fungi, Part 3 of our mini-series, The Deep, Dark, and Dirty Depths.
Good evening, I'm Kara, and I'm just along for the ride. For those of you joining us for the first time, how things work here is Josh will be leading us through a mini lecture on this topic, and we'll discuss it throughout the episode.
Expect tangents throughout. We switch off duties each week, so next week, expect Kara to helm the episode.
Now to our regularly scheduled program. Josh, what have you been hyperfixating on this week?
Well, Kara, I've been hyperfixating on fungi and all its many strange forms, but also specifically one large mushroom. I'll start off today with kind of a brief review of some things we discussed in the Roots episode, but because we discussed it in the Roots episode, I'm not going to restate too much in too great detail.
Cool.
I'll just try to recap what I think we might need to move forward, and then we'll move on to the new stuff, discuss a few different types of fungi, and then the one big one.
Yes.
So as previously discussed, fungi are notably distinct from plants and animals. They have their own phylogenetic kingdom on the tree of life. However, like plants and animals, fungi are also composed of many different cells forming one larger body. However, while animal cells have a thin membrane keeping all their bits contained, both plant and fungal cells have rigid cell walls to protect their innards.
Okay.
Though, as I think we mentioned in the Roots episode, plant cell walls are mostly made up of cellulose and other sugars.
Right.
While fungi have cell walls made up mostly of chitin and proteins and glucose derivatives, with exact combinations depending on the fungus.
Of course.
Remember also that fungi cannot make their own food in the way that plants do, right? Plants photosynthesize, they get energy from the sun. Fungi can't photosynthesize, they don't do that. Instead, fungi are more like animals in which they are heterotrophs. Remember, hetero meaning other, troph meaning nourishment. They need to consume, to eat things.
Right.
Which brings me back to mycelium, which, as a reminder, while plants have those root networks to absorb water-soluble nutrients.
Oh, right. Fungi have mycelium.
Yes.
Yes.
Which they kind of look similar, but mycelium are made of tiny hair-like filaments called hyphae, which the fungus uses to excrete digestive enzymes and then slurp up the broken down soup of raw nutrients from whatever their hyphae have been lacing themselves into. A great example of these fungal eating habits are wood decay fungi.
Sure.
Which are any fungi that, as the name implies, eat wood. Their mycelial network weaves its way into a woody plant and slowly degrades and digests the various chemical compounds that make up that wood. So some of these fungi only eat dead wood. These fungi would be called saprotrophs, though plenty of other fungi are symbiotic, meaning that they attach themselves to a living organism and siphon nutrients from them.
Right.
And remember, that can be both mutualistic or parasitic.
Right.
Usually we think of just parasites when we think of
sharing nutrients or taking nutrients from something else.
Right.
Yeah.
But symbiotic doesn't necessarily mean parasitic. It can be mutualistic. So it can be good or bad.
Right.
There are also generally 3 different types of wood rot fungi, which are broken up by which materials they absorb from the wood.
Oh, okay.
So white rot fungi eat all of the components of the wood, though it tends to leave a white, bleached look to the wood while it's consuming it, partly due to oxidation and partly because it usually eats the lignins early in the process and eats the cellulose later on.
And the lignins produce more of that color?
Yes.
Okay.
So lignin is a highly complex organic polymer that is very common as a key ingredient in the structural support tissue in plants, and is one of the chemical compounds responsible for wood having that brown coloration.
Okay.
So white rot typically gets described as fibrous because it leaves behind some of the cellulose until late into the meal, and cellulose is long and fibrous, linear chains of glucose.
Okay.
And then there are brown rot fungi, which eat mostly just the cellulose and hemicellulose of the wood, which leaves behind a lot of the lignins, that eventually oxidize and often darken into a deeper shade of brown, hence brown rot.
Right.
What's really cool about brown rots is that they tend to cause shrinkage when the wood dries, which often results in small squarish or cubical chunks of the decaying wood to fall off.
Huh.
Oh, that's right. I got to grab a picture of that for the website.
Okay.
Because it looks really cool. Or at the very least, they can become easily broken and segmented into squarish chunks. And the third of these wood decay fungi are soft rot fungi, which is purely saprotrophic. It's not symbiotic. Soft rot fungi only eat the dead and fallen trees.
Oh, okay.
And it's incredibly important in breaking down dead and fallen trees. They take on some appearances of brown and white rot because they tend to eat mostly cellulose and hemicellulose out of the wood, but some lignins are also eaten just less completely than the white rots.
Okay.
And depending on which fungi it is, it's going to consume those materials at different rates and at different times.
I feel like these 3 types of fungi are a good thing to base like some kind of fantasy or sci-fi species into like similar or hierarchical species or something. Based on like how much and what they eat or destroy or whatever.
Yeah, that'd be very fun. I'd love to know if there's any that already exist like that.
Ooh, if you know, let us know.
Yes. I love seeing fungi in sci-fi, especially.
Yeah.
Because you see them every once in a while in fantasy, and I love seeing it. But I feel like they're so rare in sci-fi.
Mm-hmm.
Anywho. Soft rot fungi literally soften up the dead trees. And they're more picky eaters than white rot, but because their menu is still similar enough, they have some visual overlap with both white and brown rot.
Sure.
Okay, so getting into the different types of fungi, or different types, different appearances, we're kind of grouping them together here.
Okay.
So when most people think of fungi, they probably think of mushrooms, right?
Yes.
Which, that's incredibly understandable. The most visible part of most fungi are the mushrooms. Mm-hmm. But mushrooms are really just the fleshy fruiting bodies of some species of fungi and are where those fungi release their spores.
Okay.
So if you've ever seen the underside of a mushroom,
yeah,
those gills, those weird little frills they have, that's where they drop their spores from.
Ah.
So those spores can float off in the breeze and eventually grow new mycelium wherever they land. However, if you cut the mushroom cap off, the top part, and place it on top of a piece of paper overnight, if the fungus is actually sporating, releasing spores, you can see a pattern of powdery spores in the shape of that mushroom's gills when you come back in the morning.
Oh, interesting.
Or after a few hours, depending on the fungus. And that spore print can be very useful in identifying and classifying the mushrooms. According to the Wisconsin Mycological Society, most fungal spores are either white, black, brown, or pink.
Gotta love it.
The Mycological Society of Toronto actually has spore print cards that amateur mushroom enthusiasts can print out on a random piece of paper to take a spore print. And it has both black and white sections that you place the cap directly on top of the dividing line so that you can compare the color with both backgrounds and make notes about the spore print for future identification.
That's cool.
Yes. Spore printing can also be a way to mail fungal spores.
Huh.
So sometimes people will get a fungal spore print as a kind of like a starter seed.
Yeah.
To grow their own colonies of mushrooms.
That's interesting. I never would have thought about the fact that you can just like send mushroom seeds because you don't think of mushrooms as having seeds.
Right, because
they don't.
Spores.
But, that you can just send a card of a mushroom print like you could send a packet of seeds to somebody.
Right. Now, I don't know anything really about the mail regulations around this.
Right.
So, proceed with caution. However, spore printing is also by no means a surefire, foolproof way of identifying a mushroom on its own, and should always be considered alongside other identifying features, such as the shape of the cap, the location of the gills, the coloration of both the cap and the stem. Naturally, my personal recommendation is if you're not 100% sure what that wild mushroom you found is,
touch it.
Just let it be.
Just don't touch it.
Yeah, don't touch it.
Don't touch it.
No, don't touch it.
Don't touch it.
All right. Also, as a note, Most fungi reproduce both sexually and asexually. Sexual reproduction allows for more genetic variety, while asexual reproduction gives the additional advantage of being able to reproduce without nearby partners. Fungi actually produce different spores for sexual reproduction than they do for asexual reproduction.
Huh, that's interesting.
Yeah. And they often release these in different phases. So typically releasing asexual spores earlier in their life cycle, sometimes multiple times, before releasing spores for sexual reproduction.
Huh.
And again, this varies by fungus because plenty of fungi only reproduce one way, but a lot of them do both.
That's really cool.
Yeah. Other types of fungi besides mushrooms.
Alrighty.
Now, I feel the need to make sure we keep in mind that fungi have incredible variety.
Yeah.
Many species are often highly specialized and have evolved to fill very specific ecological niche. Symbiotic fungi are often very specific about which other organisms they're able to attach themselves to, and they typically have evolved to only attach themselves to a few very specific target host species, which we'll get into more later, or at least have a few examples of that.
Cool.
My point here is there's a lot of other types of fungi besides mushrooms.
Yeah. Or is it more accurate to say not all fungi have mushrooms?
Yes.
Because mushrooms themselves are not the fungi. They're just like the fruiting body, so to speak.
It's what we most commonly see visually with a fungi.
Right.
So it's a common visual. There's a lot of overlap in like common language and vernacular around calling mushrooms and fungi the same thing interchangeably. But yes, you're correct. Thank you. One such example of these other fungi, beyond those that have mushrooms, are molds.
Oh, great.
Yes. So also neither molds nor mushrooms are taxonomic classifications. They can both form in many different species within the same clade or then different clades.
Okay.
So remember, clade is groupings on the tree of life based on genetic ancestry.
Yeah.
Right. And shared traits. So molds and mushrooms can appear kind of throughout the fungal kingdom, depending on the presentation of that fungus.
So it's not like a specific classification system. It's just something that you might see depending on circumstances with all kinds of different kinds of fungi.
It's more a classification for botanists and horticulturalists than it is necessarily for geneticists and biologists in that sense.
Okay.
Not that there aren't groupings, but in general, it's hard to say, this order is all the mold.
Right.
This phylum is all the mushrooms. It's not quite so clean.
Okay.
Yeah. So instead of growing mushrooms, some fungi grow mold, most of which can be described as looking or feeling fuzzy, in the gross way.
In the gross way, yeah.
Right. But in general, these are fungi which tend to form a loose mesh of mycelium instead of a less dense, large tissue like mushrooms.
Okay.
Molds release their microscopic spores from various semi-microscopic structures, and those spores then just float around on the air until it lands somewhere with both moisture and nutrients.
Like your lungs.
Right. Or maybe a damp baseboard. And at that point, they then grow their own colony of hyphae, form that mycelial network, and begin releasing their own spores.
Right.
Two of the most common types of molds that people may encounter in their everyday lives are those that often grow on aging foodstuffs.
Yep.
So molds from the genuses Aspergillus and Penicillium.
Yeah, those both sound familiar.
Yep. Aspergillus are fairly common and form large black globular spore heads that release their
the words used to describe this stuff.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Thank you.
I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
Their microscopic spores floating in the air eventually grow in soil and on various plant matter. They grow best in temperature ranges between 35 to 40 degrees Celsius or 95 degrees to 101 degrees Fahrenheit.
Hot.
Yeah. Hey, some like it hot. It's not that they won't grow at temperatures below that. They just prefer that heat.
Right. One day we'll talk about the food safety zone.
Oh, God.
And why you need to get things hot, really, really, really hot, or really, really, really cold. And this is part of the reasons.
Yes. Oh, we'll have to talk about pasteurizing milk on that episode, too.
Yes.
because it baffles me how many people talk about boiling raw milk.
As if it's the same thing as pasteurizing it?
Well, it's more extreme than pasteurization.
Yeah.
All you need to do is I don't remember the temperature range, but you don't even need to get it up to boiling. But pasteurization is basically just get it hot and then let it cool down because you need to kill off bacteria that's in there so it's not there. And the raw milk crunchies just... they see the warning labels as a conspiracy, and it baffles me.
Yeah.
Anywho, Penicillium.
Yep.
That mold may sound very familiar.
Penicillin!
Yes! One of the most widely used antibiotics is a natural byproduct of these molds.
Right.
And remember, Penicillium is not one species, but a genus containing many species. In particular, penicillin was originally derived from Penicillium notatum by Alexander Fleming in 1929.
That was the year my grandpa was born.
Oh, isn't that fun? Though it has also been obtained from Penicillium rubens and Penicillium chrysogenium, which is the species we mostly get penicillin from nowadays.
Okay.
Penicillin has a lower ideal temperature than most Aspergillus, preferring 25 degrees Celsius to 30 degrees Celsius, or 77 to 86 degrees Fahrenheit.
Right.
Which makes it a little bit more likely that the mold growing on the orange you forgot about a month ago might be penicillin or penicillium. But that doesn't mean you should eat it. Stop, put it down.
I don't touch things with mold on them anyway.
Good. Because even if it produces a natural antibiotic, most species of molds are not safe to eat.
Right.
Penicillium roqueforti, which is used in the making of blue cheeses, is perfectly safe, right, in normal quantities. But you can never really be certain which species you're dealing with, or even if it actually is penicillium,
right,
without rigorous testing. So just leave it be.
Just don't.
Yes.
Unless it's blue cheese from a trusted source.
Yeah, blue cheese, again, that's fine. Those people know what they're doing.
Right. And especially if you have an allergy to penicillin, the antibiotic, like, for example, my mother has a very bad reaction to penicillin. Please be very careful with foods that have mold on them.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There are several molds that can cause allergic reactions and respiratory problems, or just generally make you sick.
Woohoo.
So avoid. Oh, and for reference, there are about 250 species of Aspergillus.
Oh, jeez.
And as of 2014, there were 354 accepted species of Penicillium.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So again, considering the 3 big ones that we've derived penicillin from, that's a lot.
Right.
Side note, this is actually one of those things that I enjoy learning about, partly for the sake of the classic thought experiment we've all done of what would you do if you accidentally time traveled and got stranded a few hundred years in the past?
What would you do, Josh?
Well, if you know enough about molds and how to find the correct species of penicillium, you can just gather some alchemist's equipment and invent penicillin a few hundred years early to instantly become a trusted and renowned healer. I mean, you may accidentally get branded as a witch.
Right.
But people have touted the medicinal value of mushrooms for centuries.
Oh, of course.
Right. So if you can, just talk about it as being derived from a mushroom, and people are more likely to go along with it and be okay.
Yeah, whoever said you need to go back in time and invent the iPhone from scratch? No.
No. Invent penicillin a few hundred years early.
Vaccines.
Yes.
Do that shit early.
Oh, God. Though to be clear, it is a great antibiotic. It's not necessarily, at least to my knowledge, not necessarily an incredible antiviral.
Right.
So it's not going to fix everything.
No.
But you could at least be that person what knows how to treat some things super well. Anywho. And then, of course, there is the ever-discussed, very dangerous black mold, which prefers warm indoor environments, particularly anywhere between 4.4 degrees Celsius to 38 degrees Celsius.
Geez, that's a range.
Yeah, 40 degrees Fahrenheit to 100 degrees Fahrenheit.
Ugh.
Yeah, black mold has quite the temperature range where it's happy to just spread.
Of course, which is part of why it's so dangerous.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Molds don't just produce spores, by the way. They also, as a byproduct of their digestion, create what are called microbial volatile organic compounds. Or MVOCs, MVOCs, whatever for short. And to be fair, MVOCs are a rather large group of compounds created by many fungi and many bacteria. And these compounds are often useful for these organisms to communicate on a microbial, inter- and intracellular level.
Okay.
And funnily enough, they can actually modify hormonal pathways of some plants to augment their growth and production or even relieve stress for certain plants in the right circumstances.
Interesting.
Right, which
Are they used in commercial means at all?
I don't know for sure. That, I assume that's a pretty big area of study,
Right.
but it's not something I specifically looked into today.
Cool.
But interesting note for the future.
Mm-hmm.
When you walk into a mold-infested room, that dank and musty smell is mostly due to these microbial volatile organic compounds.
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to black mold, specifically the species Stachybotrys chartarum,
Great.
exposure to these compounds as well as the spores of the mold can cause allergic reactions and inflammation in the nose, eyes, and lungs.
Mm-hmm.
And in more extreme cases, with prolonged exposure, it can cause fatigue, exhaustion, lightheadedness, mental fatigue, irritability, difficulty sleeping, and problems with concentration.
Yay!
Or, for those with weakened immune systems, this can also cause a fungal infection, which, side note, fungal infection is just kind of a generic term used for any pathogen or disease caused by fungus.
Right.
Usually, this happens in your airways, but it can affect most other parts of the body as well. And black mold isn't necessarily on its own more deadly than plenty of other molds.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to kill most people just to be in the same room as black mold once in a blue moon, as long as it's not for prolonged periods of time.
Sure.
And there's really no avoiding occasionally breathing in their spores because mold spores in general are absolutely everywhere.
Sure.
But black mold gets a ton of well-earned publicity because it can be particularly difficult to get rid of once you have it,
Right.
and it spreads very easily
Yep.
in a wide temperature range. So all they need is a kind of warm and wet spot to grow, and it'll just keep growing and spreading until you eradicate it.
Yep.
Now, one of the other best well-known kind of fungi that I don't think most people would think of as fungi
Mm-hmm.
are yeasts.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Huh.
So yeast, that thing we bake into bread and
Right.
acts as a leavening agent, those are fungi.
Why did I think they were an animal byproduct?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know, but that doesn't shock me. But yeah, no, they're alive.
Cool.
And there are
But they're fungi.
Yes, they're fungi.
Right.
Yes. There are actually well over 1,500 species that we classify as being yeasts. They're not, again, actually one taxonomic or phylogenetic grouping. So kind of like how trees aren't actually one genetic group, but rather a name we give to any sufficiently woody, tall plant.
Right.
Yeah, yeasts are mostly just the name we give to most single-celled microorganisms within the fungus kingdom.
Okay.
Not all, they have some shared traits there too. But the exact nature of those shared traits gets into a level of mycology and understanding fungi that
We're not going to get into today.
I do not have time to do that much research. Or understand it well enough to communicate it at the very least.
Yeah.
There are only a few species of yeast that are useful in baking, but specifically the species Saccharomyces cerevisiae
All right.
is commonly called baker's yeast, and this is the species that humans have used in baking and alcoholic fermentation for thousands of years.
And I ask, as I always do with this kind of stuff, who the heck figured it out? Who, A, found yeast, B, was like, let's just put it in our drink and find out what happens, and then C was like, I'm sure it's safe to drink.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm sure with drinking, it probably came as an accident,
Oh, yeah, that's not surprising.
right? If you just leave a bunch of shit in a barrel and
Right.
just go, it's fine for now,
Yeah.
and then you come back later and the prune juice you've had sitting in the barrel for a month,
Now makes you a little bit giggly.
yeah, and maybe has some bubbles to it. Weird. Well, it's good.
Right.
Let's do that again. All commercially used yeasts are the same species,
Okay.
but yeasts for bread making have been bred and cultivated for different specific purposes and traits than the yeasts we use for fermentation in beers, meads, wines.
Okay.
So again, all the same species, but This yeast is considered to have multiple different strains
Yeah.
because it's been bred for those purposes.
It's like whether or not you breed your border collies to be farm dogs or
Right.
pets.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's actually a great comparison. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Both baker's yeast and brewer's yeast eat sugars and starches to produce carbon dioxide bubbles and alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
So technically, you could use any of these strains for either purpose, but baker's yeast have been specifically bred for flavor and carbon dioxide bubbles more efficiently,
Okay.
while the various strains of brewer's yeast have been bred more for efficient alcohol production and carbon dioxide bubbles depend on the intended beverage.
Yeah.
The name yeast appears to be mostly derived from the Old English word gist, meaning froth.
That's what, G-I-S-T?
Yes.
Okay.
Which appears to be based on the Germanic word gisht, meaning foam or froth, and the Proto-Indo-European root yes, or yeah, it's spelled yes. I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but it's spelled yes, which means to boil, foam, or froth.
Okay.
And as I mentioned earlier, there are over 1,500 other species of yeast out there, and their biodiversity is likewise impressive.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them thrive on the skins of various fruits and berries, and thus play a vital role in their decay and rot.
Yep.
There are multiple species of yeast that live in between human toes,
Yay.
some of which may be responsible for some of the signature foot smells that can develop.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Athlete's foot for the win.
Yeah. There are, of course, other yeasts that contribute to the microbiome of the human digestive tract.
If you have problems with that, you should take a cranberry supplement every day
Oh,
to
yeah.
prevent it. If you watched or listened to our last episode.
That's right. There was actually a study published in March of 1985 titled Yeasts Associated with Pollinating Bees and Flower Nectar, which studied 328 honey stomachs from 7 different pollinating bee species and 342 flower nectar samples of 9 different flower species and found 47 different species of yeast in either set of locations.
Wow.
With 19 species of yeast being shared between both the honey stomachs of those bees and the nectar samples. And
Jeez.
honey stomachs, by the way, are not a true stomach, but just kind of a reservoir where
Okay.
bees store honey temporarily.
Right.
But so there's a ton of microscopic fungi that play a part in how honey gets made.
Somehow that almost is like not surprising to find out,
No.
but I think I'm still trying to wrap my head around the fact that yeast is fungi at all.
Yeah. No, that's fair.
Because like nobody talks about that.
No. Well, because we don't think of it as fungi because,
Right.
again, usually fungi, we just go, you mean mushrooms.
Right.
Cool.
Yeah.
Most yeasts reproduce asexually via mitosis and budding, but a few can and do reproduce sexually, and some of those do both asexual and sexual reproduction. There are also some weird edge cases where a fungi can sometimes behave as a yeast and sometimes behave as a mold, and these are considered to be dimorphic fungi, di meaning
Okay.
two, morphic meaning form or shape,
Right.
because again, it's not necessarily a genetic distinction always, and there are some species of fungi that can behave mostly as yeast but form false hyphae, and then there are some molds that their spores behave kind of like yeasts on their own,
Okay.
never really develop true hyphae or mycelium.
Okay. So not all fungi, due to how yeasts work, not all fungi necessarily have the mycelium that we think of
Yes.
as like quote unquote root structures.
Yes, because that mycelial network is made up of those little hyphae.
Mm-hmm.
Each little chunk of hyphae are their own little cells,
Right.
and yeasts are single-celled microbial organisms.
Mm-hmm.
Next on my little list of fungi that I want to briefly discuss are mildews. Mildew can be a frustratingly imprecise word because many people colloquially use it to just describe the visible surface stains caused by molds that have grown large enough to be actually seen by the human eye. So today I'm specifically referring to mildews in the way that horticulturalists refer to it, which is a fungus that is a member of the order Erysiphales.
Okay.
So this is a phylogenetic distinction.
A genetic kind
Yes.
of thing. Right. Okay.
Yes. Fungi from the order Erysiphales commonly cause a series of diseases in plants, which are known as powdery mildew.
Okay.
So when a plant gets a white powdery residue on their leaves, that is usually powdery mildew.
Huh.
And there are a wide variety of species, specific fungi that cause this disease, and these species are very particular about which plants they infect.
Right.
So a species of fungus that causes powdery mildew in cucumber is a different fungus entirely than the fungus that causes mildew in pumpkins.
So this is one of those things where like each of these species has found a niche.
Yes.
And that niche is a specific plant.
Yes.
Cool.
Most powdery mildews are cosmetic and won't necessarily kill the plant, but some plants are more susceptible to damage and severe leaf loss from this type of disease, which can kill plenty of plants.
Mm-hmm.
The University of Wisconsin Plant Disease Diagnostics Clinic
Nice.
recommends treating those more at-risk plants infected with powdery mildew by either applying a fungicide or a mixture of baking soda, water, and paraffin-based oil.
Sure.
Yeah.
How'd you figure that one out, Wisconsin?
It's Wisconsin. Who knows?
Actually, that's probably something some grandma like 500 years ago figured out, and they found it in some like historical record.
As a side note, there are also another type of plant disease referred to by horticulturalists as downy mildews. However, those are not caused by fungus. They're caused by fungus-like organisms in the family Peronosporiaceae. And while they are colloquially called water molds, they're not technically fungi and therefore also not technically molds.
Cool. Are they plants?
No, they're microorganisms that are members of the Umicoda phylum. And that phylum actually exists outside of any kingdom.
Okay.
So
So,
they're
it's like not plant, it's not fungi,
not plant,
it's not animal.
not fungi.
Great.
Yeah, they're one of the weird outliers that don't actually have their own
We love that.
kingdom.
I love that we have things that we can't actually classify.
Well, they're classified. They have a phylum and they have, families
Right.
and orders and clades. They're not within the Opistheconta clade, which we discussed in the Roots episode is kind of the origin of fungi and animals. So if we have to go back further in the tree of life,
Yeah.
than the origin of both fungi and animals, but they're also definitely not plants. Either we make a new kingdom just for all these other outliers,
Right.
or we just go, yeah, they're a phylum. They're another classification just under kingdom, but they're not quite large enough for us to bother, at least at this point.
Creating like
It's
a
entirely,
kingdom.
it's
Right.
entirely possible that at some point in the future, we'll declare them their own kingdom,
Right.
but not right now.
Cool.
Yeah, so for now, they're fungal-like.
Great.
There are only two more types of fungi that I want to touch on before we get to the big guy.
Yeah.
So let's real quick talk about rusts.
Huh. Another one you wouldn't think is fungi.
No. Rusts are fungal pathogens, specifically,
Okay.
from the order Puciniales. They are among the most common diseases of garden plants. And while they most commonly affect the leaves, they can also be found on stems, flowers, and fruits on occasion. Their spore pustules vary in color, but they get their name from the fact that they very often appear as a ruddy brown patch on the surface of many plants. So it looks as though the plant has a little patch of iron rust crusting on its surface.
Instead, they just had to reuse a word that we already have.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Right.
Why make a new
Why
word
make a new word?
when you can just name it after something else that exists and go, oh yeah.
Yeah. Nobody's
Cool.
ever going to confuse those two things.
No.
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 Symptoms of a plant infected with rust typically include pale or discolored spots that develop into spore-producing pustules,
Ew.
which pump out a ton of spores. These pustules can be orange, yellow, brown, black, or white in coloration, and heavily infected leaves can turn yellow or brown and eventually fall off.
Right.
Rust fungi typically only infect very specific species. They have incredibly complex life cycles, though, where they may change their ideal host at various stages of their life.
Oh, that's crazy.
And depending on their stage in life, they may produce up to 5 different types of spores, each with their own target host plant.
That's wild.
Yeah. Oh, and there are approximately 7,000 species of rusts.
Wow.
The last kind of fungi I want to talk to you about are, of course, smuts.
I'm sorry, did you say smut?
Yes, not the kind of smut you find on AO3, but the smut you may find in a wheat field. And I know those two aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. But you get my point.
I do.
So, smuts...
I'm so sorry for our BookTok girlies and boys out there. I'm one of you, so my mind went there too. Anyway.
Honestly, that's part of the reason I had to include all of the different types.
Of course.
These different types of fungi, so I could justify talking about smuts. It's so funny to me that there's a whole grouping of fungi that are just, there's the smut. That's smut. Smuts are closely related to rusts.
Okay.
And similarly are fungal plant pathogens, which commonly infect various agriculturally significant vegetable crops. Most smuts are members of the order Ustilaginales or the order Teleciales. Within the true smut fungi class, Ustilaginomycetes. It appears that there are approximately 1,400 species of smuts. Still nowhere near as many tags as there are on AO3.
True.
But
true. I think I've read at least that many smuts on Kindle Unlimited.
The tags get so specific, too.
Yeah.
Anywho, they can also affect a plant's leaves, stems, flowers, and even storage organs like bulbs. So, like, flowers have bulbs that they're...
like tulips or whatever.
Yeah. A couple examples. The Allium genus of plants, including onions, shallots, leeks, and chives, are often affected by smuts on their leaves and stems, developing dark streaks and blisters, and those blisters eventually burst or pop to release a huge number of spores all at once. Meanwhile, Scylla, not the Greek mythological monster, but bulb-forming perennial flowering plants, including amethyst meadow squill and lesser glory of the snow, are often affected by anther smuts, which are, they more or less hijack the male reproductive systems of these flowers to replace their pollen grains with smut spores.
Very nice.
Yes. Smuts can also affect sweet corn, wheat, barley, forget-me-nots, dahlias, among many others. And smuts can contaminate the soil around the plants they infect for up to 15, even 20 years after initial infection.
Years? I thought you were going to say like yards, and I was going to be like, well, that's kind of a far distance, but years.
Yeah. They return season after season to reinfect new growth so long as the conditions remain favorable.
It's kind of evil.
Oh, it is. But
if you don't mind me personifying the fungi.
A little personification here and there.
Never hurt anybody.
Nah. All right, so that's what I've got for a quick overview of lots of different types of fungi. So let's take a quick break. Alrighty, welcome to the brief break from the grime of the Underdark. Please rate and review us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts if you're liking the show. You can also follow the show on those platforms as well as our socials. If you're feeling extra generous, we greatly appreciate a visit to our Patreon page to support the show and help us to continue to yap about all the things that interest us.
Just to let you all know, now that we're into the holiday season, we will be taking a couple of weeks off from releasing an episode. You may have noticed that we didn't have an episode last Saturday due to Thanksgiving. Coming up here in December, we will also be off Saturday the 21st and 28th for the Yule/Christmas holiday and New Year's. If you want to check out our release schedule, it's available on the homepage of our website, www.hyperfixation-investigations.com.
I think that's all the plug and announcement we have for now, so let's head on back to the dirt for a really big mushroom. Now, having covered some of the insane diversity that exists within the fungi kingdom, I want to circle back around to mushrooms real quick so we can discuss one mushroom in particular. And I do mean one truly singular mushroom.
Oh, great.
In the Blue Mountains of eastern Oregon, in Malheur National Forest, a 1.7 million acre region of alpine lakes, high desert grasslands, sage, juniper, pine, and fir trees, this national forest is home to over 240 miles of hiking trails, several campgrounds, and of course, the Humongous Fungus.
I'm sorry, did you say... did you say the Humongous Fungus?
Yes.
That is what it's actually called.
That is the nickname that it was given, and it stuck.
What is with you and things that have weird nicknames? First it was General Sherman, and then it was Pando, and now we're to the Humongous Fungus.
I don't know what it is exactly. I am just fascinated by extreme cases of weird organisms.
Yeah.
It's also just great that the name rhymes
Yes, of
itself.
course. Yeah.
It's very satisfying to say.
Mm-hmm.
The Humongous Fungus. So actually, that's a great callback. When I was talking about Pando a few weeks ago,
Yeah.
I talked about him being the largest tree in the world by landmass and weight.
Yep.
106 acres and 6 million kilograms,
For
respectively.
Pando, right?
Yeah. Well, Pando is dwarfed by this mushroom.
Oh my god, really?
Yes. The Humongous Fungus is a single member of the species Armillaria ostoyae, which covers 2,385 acres, about 3.7 square miles, or
Wow.
9.5 square kilometers. The Humongous Fungus currently is believed to be the largest single living organism on Earth by both biomass and landmass.
Huh.
Even the low-end estimations put its weight somewhere at about 7,565 tons, which is over 15 million pounds or 6.8 million kilograms, which
That's-
is...
Like, you can't even really wrap your brain around that.
No, it's huge.
Yeah.
And it's about 800,000 kilograms heavier than Pando. And that's the low estimate,
Right.
right? Because the larger estimates potentially weigh this mushroom in at an estimated upper range of 35,000 tons,
Wow.
70 million pounds, or 31.7 million kilograms, up to 6 times as heavy as Pando.
So wait, so when we say mushroom,
Oh, sorry, 5 times as large as Pando.
right. So when we say mushroom, are we saying like the whole mycelium system and a bunch of mushrooms that come out of it?
In this case, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So
I
there is
am
not
using
just,
both interchangeably
there is
here.
not just a random mushroom head someplace that is 3.7 square miles large.
No, it is. Thank you for catching me on that. I have been using them interchangeably. It is the full mycelial network.
Okay.
And all of its mushrooms.
Various offshoots.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
Yes. Good catch.
It's just like, I have this mental image of like just a giant fucking mushroom cap in the middle of a forest somewhere that people go and like jump on like a trampoline.
Now I'm just imagining like the mushrooms from Treasure Planet,
Yeah.
except one really big one.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, gods. So, Armillaria ostoyae, which are commonly known as shoestring fungus or honey mushrooms, feed by parasitizing on nearby trees.
Okay.
Their hyphae cluster into thick cords called rhizomorphs, and that can resemble plant roots vaguely in appearance.
Mm-hmm.
But they pierce nearby tree root systems and spread their mycelium in a mat under the bark of the tree. And it kind of resembles a thin layer of white latex paint under the bark. And this damage and visual affliction in trees is often called Armillaria root disease. And it can actually take an incredibly long time to kill a tree, anywhere from 20 to 50 years.
Wow.
Yeah. But the whole time, the fungus is siphoning energy away from the tree to feed itself. However, even after the tree dies, the fungus continues feeding on the dead wood, making this fungus both parasitic and saprotrophic.
Interesting. So it feeds off of the living thing, the tree, through the root system and the bark and whatever. And then even once it's dead, it can't let it live in peace, and it continues to consume it when it's dead.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, but it takes such a long time
Right.
to eat through it that this giant mycelial network, this giant fungus, hasn't stripped bare this chunk of forest. There are still plenty of trees that grow here.
Yeah.
They just grow in unhealthy conditions that ultimately end in their demise and digestion by a huge fungus.
Cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
We could almost make some analogies here, but I'm not going to get into it.
Yeah, it's kind of right there. Malheur National Forest has a bit of a fungal infestation of Armillaria ostoyae in the Reynolds Creek and Clear Creek areas, and this has been known for a while. and investigations by the Forest Service is what eventually led Forest Service employee Greg Whipple,
That's a great name.
oh yeah, to eventually officially discover this particular mushroom in 1988.
Wow.
So fairly recently.
Yeah.
Originally, it was believed to cover nearly 400 acres, which, again, is huge.
Huge, but not as huge as it actually is.
Right. Genetic testing of fungi in the area eventually found them to be genetically identical and thus revealed the true size of this fungus.
That's crazy.
Oh, and the humongous fungus also isn't alone. It has neighbors
Of course it does.
of the same species in the same region of the forest, each only a few miles away. These neighbors, while nowhere near quite as massive as the humongous fungus itself,
Sure.
have each been estimated to be 642 acres with a maximum age of like 4,900 years.
Wow.
482 acres with a maximum age of 4,900 years. 235 acres with a maximum age of 4,000 years. And the last colony only comes in at 50 acres, and I didn't see an age estimate for this guy. But 50 acres is still damn impressive.
Yeah.
Even if it doesn't seem like it compared to the humongous fungus.
So is this extreme growth of the shoestring fungi, is that normal, or is that just like this particular area for some reason they just grow massive here?
I think it's not unusual for them to grow fairly large, but these are
Extreme cases?
as
Okay.
far as I understand it.
Yeah.
And estimates as to the rate of growth and spread of the humongous fungus range from 8 inches a year to 3.3 feet per year.
Wow.
So this, combined with genetic information, has been used to create a range of estimates in its age. So, do you want to make a guess how old this guy is?
Well, I can cheat and look at it.
Yeah, okay. Well, if you weren't looking at my notes, what age would you guess off the top of your head?
Off the top of my head, the smaller ones are about 5,000 years old, right?
Yeah.
So I'd say like 7,500.
That's a fair estimate. Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, keeping in mind the Ice Age is always a probably reasonable upper limit for most of these guys. But using the growth rate and known growth rates and behaviors of similar colonies of this fungus, the estimates currently put this guy anywhere from 1,900 years old on the low end, which, again, I didn't discuss the low end of the other 4.
Right.
But the high end is up to 8,650 years old.
Wow.
Yeah. And we just haven't quite done enough studies to get a more definitive answer, or at least a narrower range of possibilities yet.
Right.
And I do say yet because there are studies ongoing through the National Forest Service to better understand this fungus.
For as long as it exists.
Yes. And how it managed to get so large, live so long, and how best to respond to its existence.
Right, because like it's a living creature, but it's also killing a bunch of trees. But it's killing them slowly.
Right. It's not like a plague destroying everything and leaving nothing in its wake. It kills things slowly enough that
other things can regrow. And, yeah.
And it's deeply ingrained in the local ecosystem, and plenty of animals rely on the fallen and decaying trees for food and shelter.
Sure.
So, as usual, taking any quick and brash action is probably ill-advised.
Right.
As we said earlier, I'm just fascinated by these weird outlier cases or extreme versions of various organisms. And I love seeing people stumble across something and go, oh, this guy's a little weird. Let's look into this thing. Oh, hey, some genetic testing reveals that stand over there. Yeah, that's the same fungus. No, I'm endlessly fascinated by the really big mushrooms. And I love mushrooms.
Of course.
And I love fungi in general.
Yes.
Oh, I just realized. I have to do some live fact checking. Hang on.
Okay.
I didn't look into whether or not Armillaria ostoyae is edible.
This is really important to know whether or not we can eat the humongous fungus.
Yes, I need to know.
I also need to know if it's psychedelic for unrelated, non-digestion related reasons.
Sure. Let's see. Oh, the mushroomdiary.co.uk. What do you say?
Also, we'll have to do another mini-series on megafauna.
Oh, I plan to.
Yes.
Yes.
I want the giant river otters.
Oh my god. I mean, charismatic megafauna in general.
Yeah.
Love them.
We love it.
I wish there were more charismatic megafauna in North America than just the moose. But the moose is already phenomenal. Anywho, yeah, because again, it is sometimes called the honey mushroom.
I feel like I've heard somebody on a cooking channel cook shoestring mushrooms. Now, I could be entirely wrong, and it could be something else that has the word shoestring in it or something.
All right, at least according to a 2014 article from mushroomdiary.co.uk.
Great.
Most people consider this fungus edible, but it must be thoroughly cooked, and only a little tried at first, as it can cause upset stomach for some people.
Okay.
So, because it's sometimes upsetting for some people's stomachs, some experts consider it to be at least mildly poisonous and not worth trying. But
if you really had to, you could wash it and boil it in the woods and probably be fine if you to survive.
yeah.
It's not necessarily going to kill you.
Most likely. I mean, any disease could really do you in, especially if you're just out in the woods, in this example.
Yes, exactly.
Yes. But, God, I want to try it.
Of course you do.
I want to try the humongous fungus.
Of course you do.
Even if it's only mildly poisonous, as long as it's not horrendously toxic. And yes, I know I'm ignoring my own advice. If you're not 100% sure if it's safe, don't eat it. Don't listen to me. Just,
listen to
do
him.
as I say, not as I do.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
Our parents' favorite adage. At least my father's favorite adage.
All right, that I think is all I have on the humongous fungus at this point.
Fantastic.
Do you have any questions for me that I didn't get to yet?
I don't think so. I feel like this has been a really great wrap up of roots and megaflora and what we've talked about so far in this mini series of the deep, dark, and dirty depths.
Yes.
And no, this was actually a lot of fun. I learned a lot from this one, and it'll be interesting to see what part 4 far down the road may be.
Yeah, because it'll be a
it'll
while.
Be a while
I think.
before we come back to this, but
yeah.
No, I think this was really interesting.
Yeah. Cool.
Alrighty.
All right. Awesome. Then let's wrap it up, I guess.
That's a wrap on episode 6, Fungi. If you'd like to delve further into this topic, our research sources and related images are posted on our website, hyperfixation-investigations.com. That is www.hyperfixation-investigations.com. Thank you so much for listening.
Follow us on social media for updates and check out our Patreon to support us directly. Join our Discord community and receive other special perks.
See you next week, and remember, what's a little info dumping between friends?